Hello, it's Friday, May 26, 2023. I'm American writer and historian Jack Dempsey, and today I want to share with you a friendship with the Reverend Dr. Karen Tate, author, lecturer, teacher, cultural activist, and a facilitator of learning that heals and changes people's lives. Karen was named one of the quote 13 most influential women in goddess spirituality by the blog Theapoetics in 2013, along with other luminaries including Marija Gimbutas and Carol Christ. Karen also hosts distinguished cultural historians with her online BlogTalk forum called Voices of the Sacred Feminine. Don't miss it, and the archive is astonishing. You will learn so much there, you won't believe it. She works on many levels to revive the hard fact histories of healthy, women centered cultures that can heal and empower us, publishing, for example, Sacred Places of Goddess in 2007, an outstanding travel guide that can take you to real places of ancient inspiration. In 2014, she published Goddess Calling, and in 2020, Awaken the Feminine, Dismantling Domination to Restore Balance on Mother Earth. Those are titles that can tell you a lot about Karen's agenda as a researcher, scholar, and social activist. So, we're here today to explore and gain the wisdom in Karen's new book, Normalizing Abuse, a commentary on the culture of pervasive abuse. It works to free us from the worst of our patriarchal culture that has ruled, by hook, crook, and outright violence, the concentric lives of women and men, families, societies, and their economies for centuries. I'm proud to help bring attention to Karen Tate's works that do so much toward a healthy new beginning. Karen, good morning. It's evening for me, but how are you doing today? And you've had quite a past year in terms of returning to a long and already distinguished career. There
Oh,
are so many
well,
things to talk about, but let's open the floor to you.
well, hi, Jack, and thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here with you, and you've been on my radio show, but it's so nice to actually see your face, and we can talk, looking at one another.
I
So
like that
so
too, yeah.
I appreciate this. But yeah, I am in Southern Oregon now. The last 5 years of my life have been quite tumultuous and challenging. And ultimately, I realized they were a gift. And it inspired the book, Normalizing Abuse. So I'm back at it after being on hiatus for about 3 or 4 years. That sort of took me off the grid, and I was under a rock trying to heal and
Yep.
reflect. And but as of January of this year, I'm back at it. I feel like I'm my old self again.
I notice online when I try to do my homework on you, it's hard to find out, let's say, where you were born, where you grew up, what schools you got your degrees from. And, there's a clear, dynamic, creative, and activist tide and momentum to your life of work, right? But what about those early things? Just for a minute, tell us where you grew up and what that was like, how you became this driven, compassionate person that you are, Karen.
Well, to be very honest, and I've talked about this, but it might not be in print quite so much. I started out in New Orleans, Louisiana, the
Wow.
Bible Belt of the South,
Yeah.
and until I was 30 years old. And I say this to you because I hope it gives people hope that others can change their ways. Growing up there in the South in the Bible Belt, I will be totally honest and tell you, because I didn't meet anyone else different. I grew up racist, white supremacist, Fox News watching, thought Rush Limbaugh was a god. And I didn't know any better. We're in our bubble and we don't know what we don't know. And if we never, get anything to challenge these belief systems, then sometimes we get stuck in these really toxic patterns. But when I was 30,
Wow, that's the
I think,
phrase. Toxic patterns. Excuse me.
yeah, yeah. We get stuck in these toxic patterns and we don't even know they're toxic patterns. It's just normal for us, right? It's the way it is. That's life. Everybody we know thinks that way. So we just think that it's fine. And maybe we don't even hear anything different when we go to church on Sunday. Also, I grew up a Catholic. I didn't meet anyone that wasn't a Catholic or a Baptist. So I was pretty sheltered when I look back on it now. And
Was there a breaking moment for you? What was the St. Paul on the road to Damascus moment for you?
Well, I will tell you that I was fortunate that my family weren't religious zealots. Religion was secondary. We went to church on Sunday, but it didn't dominate every aspect of our life. So
Hmm.
I was really interested in ancient cultures and mythology, especially Egypt. So I delved into stuff like that as a kid. Unlike most of the people I knew who, I don't know, just didn't have that intellectual curiosity. Um,
Let me ask you, around your family supper table as you were growing up and as you were living your adult life, was the forum at your supper table relatively open? You could talk about basically anything you wanted and it would be discussed and debated. Is that kind of the atmosphere you grew up in? A lot of
yes
people
and
who
no.
express active, compassionate, activist healing, including Dutch people, for example, who were studied for having saved a lot of Jewish people during World War II from the Nazis. They said, what is the one thing they all have in common, these families that risked everything to help others? And they said, around our supper table, you could talk about anything you wanted.
Well, I have to give my mother credit.
Yeah.
It's not like we sat around the dinner table, but let's call it the metaphorical dinner table.
Okay.
She instilled some ideas in me, and maybe these, for all her faults, there was good there too. She always told me to fight for the underdog. you know
Mhm.
and I believe it's because she felt like maybe as a woman of her time, because she probably I should know this, but I've never stopped to calculate it. She lived at a time when women didn't have a lot of options.
Yeah.
uh, and I don't think she was very happy. And she falls into that category that we read about in the feminine mystique, that women had to medicate themselves to endure their lives.
I feel as if
And
our listeners right now are saying that's a form of abuse. Those kinds
yes.
of limitations, artificial, culturally inflicted limitations on anybody, it's a form of abuse for some reason that I hope we can turn over the rock tonight and take a look at what's going on there.
Well, yeah, absolutely, because we normalize that abuse. We say, well,
Yeah,
that's just
that's the
the way
word.
culture is. That's the way society is. We sanitize it. We whitewash it. We brainwash ourselves. And, so we endure it. We tolerate it. We don't reject it. And what I really want to do with this book, Normalizing Abuse, is have us look at things and rethink things and say, hey, wait, income disparity, that might be a label that's accurate, but that's a sanitized label. Instead, we should be saying capitalism and corporations exploit women's labor. you
Yeah,
know I
yeah,
think that takes it to a different level. You know what I
yeah.
mean? Yeah.
Capitalism demands injustice.
Yes, yes, it does. And I've learned from interviewing, scholars like you on my radio show. I remember when I had Richard Wolff on my show, he actually told me that professors in the United States could not talk about capitalism in a negative way on a college level if they expected to get tenure. This is I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but this is
Right.
a strategy. This is a strategy to keep people ignorant so they go rah, 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 capitalism, when capitalism is killing them, you know?
The core word of capitalism is profit. If you look up that word, it has cousins in advantage and progress. Both of those are relative terms. They disadvantage the other side. I taught 22 years at an American business university, and not one student I ever met knew the meaning of the core word, profit.
Yeah.
It means taking something for nothing.
Well, yeah, and you think about these billionaires who Bernie Sanders really opened my eyes on a whole new level to the 1% versus the 99%, here
Hmm.
in the United States when he was running for office. And I think he opened the eyes of a lot of other people. And it made me see that we are not educated about, well, what is democratic socialism? What is socialism? What is Marxism? Do any of these other economic ways of being out there in the world, economic systems, do they have something that would benefit the worker better than capitalism? Because we're sure not benefiting, our tax dollars don't go to ourselves. Our tax dollars mostly go to corporate welfare, the military industrial complex. It's shameful that we don't have a solid safety net here in the United States, and that is abuse and exploitation. They are exploiting our tax dollars and not giving it back to us in terms of to give us the security we need to lead a life that isn't filled with trauma and insecurity.
Now, in this new book, Normalizing Abuse, it seems that as I read the list of your book titles, Karen, there's a real foundation in historical precedent for things being otherwise. In other words, the edge of that experience, knowing that things have been otherwise, gives us the relief in our vision to see that, well, this is abuse. So, how, first of all, do you define abuse as distinct from, well, everyday life, where sometimes bad stuff happens?
Well, sometimes there is no distinction, but let me backtrack just a tad because
Sure.
I want to tell people how I got out of that, racist, Fox News watching mindset. My husband and I picked up and left New Orleans, Louisiana, the Bible Belt of the South, and we moved to California, and I discovered the sacred feminine. And at first, it was just about, well, wow, a feminine face of God. We didn't learn that in the South. We didn't learn that in Christianity.
No,
They
ma'am.
they let us have Mary, but she's benign and passive, right? She's not a warrior goddess. She's not on the level of God. She's secondary, like women have become secondary in patriarchal religion, right?
Mhm.
And I started to understand that mythology shapes our culture. I started to learn more about the sacred feminine and understood that it's not just a deity that existed in ancient times that was revered all around the world. It's important because it's also an archetype, and she also represents certain values.
We
Values.
become we become what we honor and imitate. And I think right now we're sure copying the wrong heroes.
Exactly. In patriarchy, capitalism, all these oppressive systems, they devalue the values of the sacred feminine. They tell us those are weak, when instead, if we had those values at the center of our society, it would make the world a better place for the most of us instead of the 1%, you know?
That's
So
certainly true.
so that's how I started to make the shift. And I realized the error of my toxic belief systems. And I became a social justice activist along with, um, you know, teaching women about how important the sacred feminine is. Because, Carol Christ, from your area of the world, Carol Christ talks about why women need the goddess. And just one of the reasons is, women grow up thinking God is only, men are only created in the image of God. And
Yeah.
so that has enabled men to take this position of authority, take this position, above women, and they've expected women to take a back seat to them, to obey them, to be submissive to them. But when and when a woman doesn't grow up with the sacred feminine, it affects her self-esteem. It affects how she values herself.
Of course.
So when you see the sacred feminine, you go, hey, wait a minute. I should never have been a second class citizen. Nobody said I should be submissive to submit to
Yeah.
male authority.
And do the math. It's let's say 100, even generously, 100,000 years of human civilization. How many of them have been distinctly patriarchal, distinctly war centered, distinctly capitalist in their exploitation and capture of resources? All of 4,000. That's 4%. 4% of our human time has been like this, but look at how intensely awful it is becoming. So we're distinguishing, Karen, abuse from the sufferings that inhere in life sometimes. We're not talking about some kind of utopian fix all for people's problems. But can you talk a little bit about, well, abusive relationships? These are the
Yeah,
first, the building block of your society is your personal relationships. A lot of
yeah.
people, I should think, go on suffering in one just to avoid the tumult and the dislocation of changing their life. It can be a terribly wrenching experience, right? So, do you
Yes.
find that most people want to change but can't? Or what, how does your book speak to them?
Okay, well, first of all, let me say, all suffering cannot be avoided. If you're disabled, well, there's suffering involved with that. If a loved one dies, there's suffering involved with that. But I'm talking about, institutional systems that create suffering. That we just accept as normal, whether it be in an institutional system like patriarchal religion that has caused women to suffer, or capitalism that causes the 99% to suffer.
Or
These are,
marriage as a
or
block of
marriage.
that? Yeah.
Yes, yes. I mean, we could be in a toxic family where we have known nothing but anxiety and depression our entire life. And we might not even realize that cloud hanging over us because we have known nothing else, right?
Yeah.
And
So it's a
it's
kind of a
really,
bubble in which people are contained. Excuse me.
yes, yes, we are all in our bubbles, all in our bubbles. And it's so important that, people hear this and say, well, wait a minute. My quality of life isn't real good. Maybe it's because of a father or a mother. Maybe it's because of a husband. Maybe it's because of a boss. Maybe it's because of the professor that you're interning with. I mean, there's people who have authority over us have such a big responsibility to wield that authority using the values of Ma'at, if we want to go back to an Egyptian goddess.
Balance, balance.
Balance, balance, and justice, and right living, being right.
Yes,
And I don't mean right versus wrong. I mean right versus misuse. So
yes.
so what I'm trying to say is, I think we all have to take a beat and have the courage, because it does take some courage, and reflect, start at the beginning. Think about the things that maybe you've stuffed, and you just forgot about, or maybe you never want to think about again. Rethink those, and think about who were the people that uplifted you, that nurtured you, that supported you, and who were the people that maybe said you were no good, you'll never amount to anything, you don't deserve anything but minimum wage, you
Yeah.
don't deserve to go to college, whatever it is. And I sort of redefine abuse and exploitation in the book, because you know what? It can be anything from people who verbally abuse you to murder. It can be the corporation that is charging you twice as much for something, and in the package you have twice as little as you used to. That's exploitation. You think about how the corporations, in these last few years have made record profits, but yet they're raising the prices and saying they had to raise the prices because of supply chain issues. Well, you'd think that, they wouldn't be making record profits. They've just chose to inflate prices and exploit the public,
So in your book, then, Karen, Normalizing Abuse, you're showing people the patterns and the means by which these kinds of abuse go on, and thereby help them to recognize it in their own lives. Is that why it would be a good book to study up on?
Yes, absolutely. Because what I did in the book was I started out with my own story and I was honest about the things I uncovered in my life that I haven't looked at for a while,
Hmm.
and that I needed to rethink. But then I took it to religion, I took it to corporations, the media, government, the workplace, family and friends, society and culture, the military, all of these different aspects that create the world, all of these, and I unpacked them and said, look at this. We have been accepting this as normal and just the way it is, when really it's abuse and exploitation. Let's look at that. Let's call it what it is, because I believe if you call it what it is, then the powers that be that do these things, it's a little bit harder for them to get away with it. Like for instance, non-disclosure agreements, right? That used to be something that an employer maybe made you sign to protect their intellectual property. Well, now bad actors use non-disclosure agreements to hide the bad things they do. You know,
Hmm.
so
Yeah.
you can see the difference. Non-disclosure agreements are just normal and an everyday occurrence, but they can be a form of abuse and exploitation because they are silencing someone from saying maybe what happened to them or what the abuser did.
So a person in that situation could say, I'm wondering in the details of my own life and relationships, where, if anywhere, someone is deriving a selfish benefit from my unhappiness, from my selfishness, from my powerlessness. Someone else is getting a selfish benefit from it. This isn't happening to me just because I'm a weak individual. It's because somebody has their thumb on my neck, and
Yes.
and I can locate that point and thereby maybe free yourself.
Yes, and selfish benefit is a really good phrase to use because it is, taking advantage of someone for the benefit of someone else. It's not an equal playing field. It's not creating a win-win situation. It's creating a win-lose situation, and it doesn't have to be that way. I mean, you think about how many years it's been since the minimum wage has gone up. Some people are working 2 and 3 jobs to keep food on the table and a roof over their head, while other people, they're building rockets and going to Mars. You know what I mean? The
Yeah.
income disparity, it's sinful. It's exploitation, it's abuse. And I have a theory, Jack. We've sort of gotten away in our culture from talking about sin. And maybe this is just some of my Christian upbringing coming back to me, but I can't help but wonder if we looked at some of these things that happen to us that are abuse and exploitation, if we actually realize that, well, you know what? That's sin. That's usury. If we started calling it sin, would it matter to us in our minds subconsciously? Would we be less likely to accept it and endure it if we called it?
It's an antiquated word, sin, but it signifies an offense against something that should be sacred,
Yes, yes.
a
Because these people,
relationship.
Yes, because these people that create toxic relationships in our lives, whether they be family, community, religion, our boss, whoever it is, they have power over us. We want to, we have to work. We want to belong to a community. Well, maybe these jobs, these communities, maybe they're toxic. Maybe our friends are even toxic for us.
Well,
Maybe some of our family members are.
I know from writing books that when you finish writing a book, Karen, your thinking doesn't stop. It keeps going. And there's that horrible publication day where you have to have the cutoff. But I want to ask you this. Having been through all the chapters of your latest work, anatomizing these structures of abuse, do you have a feeling in your gut about what's more important for a person to rip free of exploitive relationships or to try to play the game, get along, make even your oppressor accountable? Sometimes you can only either get away or make somebody accountable. You can't have both.
Yeah, well, I think that's going to be on an individual basis, Jack. I don't think
See,
there's an absolute answer there. Sometimes you want to just get away and have a better quality of life. And if you want to be a whistleblower, because I have a chapter on the whistleblowers in my book and how
ah,
courageous,
lots of
um,
people know lots of secrets.
that's right.
Go
That's
ahead.
right.
Yep.
And some people maybe have the courage and the wherewithal to be a whistleblower. We all don't have the courage for that. Sometimes the best we can do is just get away and lead a better life. And it doesn't mean we have to totally turn our life upside down. I want to stress that because change can be difficult, but we don't have to do it all at once. We can do it in baby steps. Maybe the first step is just becoming aware of where the abuse is happening in your life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then you start to think, okay, well, what are some exit strategies? What might I be able to do? What can I tolerate? Maybe you start to look for another job. Maybe you decide you don't want to work for an oil company because an oil companies are raping the earth. Maybe instead you go to work for a company who serves humanity in some capacity, and that makes you feel better about yourself because then you are in service to others rather than being complicit in the destruction of the planet.
And that's where your growth can happen and can benefit other people in turn. So I
Yeah.
think this is another reason that's pointing me to the importance of a book like Normalizing Abuse, why people should get a look at this thing. It's on Kindle editions, is that right?
Yeah, you can. I would direct people to either my website, KarenTate.net, or
Good.
go to Amazon. I did self-publish it on Amazon, and you can either get it in Kindle or you can get it in paperback.
Yes, and your program is now Wednesdays at 11 a.m. Pacific time, right?
Yes, yes, it's
There's
Voices
the
of the Sacred Feminine, Wednesdays at 11, but you can always listen later from the archives if you
yes,
can't listen live.
which are terrific. When you see the list of guests that this person has brought to speak in depth about their work historically, i.e., we have not always been this way, and activists politically to say, what are the ways out? What are the ways forward? How do we not only survive this, but start to live again on a healthy planet? So,
Yeah,
as you just said, Karen, it begins with identifying the structures that are hurting us and getting free from those things one way or another. I would love, I think, and the audience would too, if you could talk so much about your own experience. You reached there was an attack on you, from what I understand, and it really sent you into a tailspin, and you had to recognize a lot of patterns that were going on against you, and you rose from it. Would you like to talk about that curve, that
sure.
arc of
Yeah.
experience?
I mean, I was already a social justice activist and I knew about patriarchy. I knew about predator capitalism. But what happened to us over the course of a few years really made me start looking at all of this in depth and, get into some of the stuff that we've touched on briefly.
Hmm.
But yeah, I was attacked by a young woman wielding a stun gun. And it was a totally random thing. I didn't know her. She thought I had her telephone. I didn't have her telephone, and I couldn't convince her I didn't have her telephone, and she attacked me with a stun gun. Well,
Wow.
I didn't realize after that happened the effect it had on me. I wasn't physically hurt, but I was psychologically hurt. And it started to manifest in anxiety, depression, nightmares. I had these nightmares that somebody was trying to shove me in a dark hole into a wall. I would dream that my house had no roof or no walls. I would literally walk
Wow.
across the wooden floor in our house and the floorboards would creak and I would think the house was going to collapse. I wouldn't brush my teeth. I went for days without bathing. I mean, I didn't care about anything. I was like a tree with bare branches, and I didn't care if anything ever sprouted there again. I was afraid to go places. I quit my
And this had
radio
never been
show.
this. You had never been this way before.
No, no, no. I was out there doing, I mean, you can see I'm all over YouTube. I mean, I was doing my podcast for, more than a decade. I was giving talks at the Parliament of World Religions, the American Academy of Religions. I mean, I was out there in the world, but
Hmm.
now I was afraid to go to the mall because, if I didn't know if these strangers were going to hurt me. I was afraid to make a car trip because maybe the car would stop, and I didn't realize this was all post-traumatic stress disorder from the stun gun attack. I really, in the moment, I was just trying to deal with the symptoms and I didn't attribute it to the attack. And then as I'm trying to deal with that, my husband fell and hit his head and incurred a brain injury. So we were in dire straits. We lost our job, the roof over our head, all of our benefits, our income. We moved to an isolated place to be able to afford to live. And it was very difficult. We lost connection with our friends because we were now like 2 hours away. We lost our connection with ourselves. My
So,
husband.
so you're in this condition, and the floor falls out from under the both of you, and you hit a kind of bottom. Do you think in this trend, and what was the bouncing back point? What could have possibly turned that around?
Well, I think for one thing, we were in nature. And I
Oh,
think,
nature,
I think that helped. We were
no
not
doubt.
in a big city with dense traffic and stress.
Yeah,
Um, while we did have a lot of stress, we didn't have that external pressure. Um,
bombardment. Yeah,
Yes, yes, the bombardment that stops us from being able to even think, right?
yeah. That's the
Um,
game.
yeah, exactly. And
That's the
and
bubble.
I started to delve into different therapies. I did talk therapy for a while. I was on an antidepressant, but then I did alternative therapies too. I did shamanic journeying and an assortment of other things. But a lot of it was reflection, and I'm very analytical, and so I really started to think about this on different levels. And slowly, slowly, things started to make sense. And you know, my husband was able to get into brain boot camp, and he was there 5 days a week, from 8 hours a day. That gave me, took the pressure off a little bit, so that I had some alone time, and I wasn't
Mhm.
trying to take care of him while I was trying to heal myself. And it gradually, um, things started to ease up. I actually started to see what had happened to us as a gift to put us in a better place and to put us on a better trajectory.
And you
I
paid a price for that, though. And I think the audience is going to notice this in the arc of your story is that they had to begin a tremendous inward looking
yes,
for where the points of power were. What can I use? What can I really build on to get back out of this terrible place? That takes a
yeah.
lot of courage and a lot of focused insight. And a lot of people are afraid to look inward that far, that long.
Well, yes, because Jack, I considered myself a social justice activist. I consider myself savvy, intelligent, and here I thought, this, the social justice work I was doing, I thought I was helping other people, and I couldn't even see. I was blinded to the abuse that was happening to me, and and what had gone on in my own life. And I started to realize that even if we get out of the situation, it follows us to a certain extent.
Sure
we have
does.
we have to take it out and look at it, because even though I got out of toxic situations, it still shaped the way I maybe thought about myself, the decisions I made, the way I looked at the world and the people around me. So it's really important that we look at the abuse and we deal with it, because we're still going to have the wounds, and we want to heal the wounds. We don't just want to put a band-aid on it,
Yeah.
because something is going to come along and pull the band-aid off, and that wound is going to start oozing again.
The old saying is true. If you don't go to the root of the problem, you end up only making a worse mess.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, and I started to realize that, I think probably like so many women, I lived a life of insecurity. And I even started thinking about the body mind connection. I suffered from terrible fibroids that, just caused me to hemorrhage. And I started making it, I mean, and doctors don't know why millions of women have, bleeding fibroids in their uterus. And I have started to think about that body mind connection, actually. And I can't help but wonder if it's because of, in some cases, the abject insecurity so many women live in. And their womb becomes the source, the holder of that trauma and stress and anxiety.
Well, the majority of the population now is in what they call in the economic epoch that we're in, the precariat. You're living one check from the door. You're
Yeah.
right on the edge all the time. Karen, we've got about 2 minutes left, and I want to just thank you for so much insight on these structures of abuse that do so much to rob us of our lives. Is there anything you'd like to close with so that people can get your book, study its research, and benefit from the experience and wisdom that you've recorded in it?
I guess I would like to say that things didn't always, they weren't always this way, and things can be different. We cannot, fall into hopelessness. We don't, if we're students of history, we know there were times in our past when the common good did really matter. And we have to get to that point again where the common good matters. We have to get to a point where greed is taboo, where we recognize that we are a traumatized society, and we start to look for ways to not just heal ourselves, but also our society. And I think one thing that's really important is we can't, keep voting abusers into office. So
Wow,
anyway,
is that for sure?
Yes, I would just please direct your listeners to my website, KarenTate.net, KarenTate.net. That's the hub for everything there, my writing, my books, my podcast, and I would love to hear from your listeners.
Okay, Karen, thank you so much. I know this book is going to be important because it's such an appropriate book for the times and the fabric of life we're more and more living in all the time. It simply has to change. And I know a lot of people are going to be really grateful for that work. So thank you for this time today speaking to everybody. We wish you God bless. Keep on rising in your next works, and we'll see you out here in the universe.
Thank you, Jack.
Okay, my friend. Bye bye.
Bye.